My kid complained we were poor on TikTok, so I handed him our eviction notice and the budget spreadsheet. The notification came through at 3:47 in the morning while I was loading boxes at the warehouse. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I almost ignored it because I had another 4 hours on this shift and the foreman was watching me. But something made me check. The screen showed 847 new followers on an account I didn't even have. Someone had tagged me in a video, my son's account. I clicked it and felt my stomach drop through the concrete floor. There was Dylan, 16 years old, sitting in our kitchen filming himself with that stupid ring light I'd bought him for his birthday. Behind him you could see our peeling wallpaper, the water stain on the ceiling, the cabinet door hanging off one hinge that I kept meaning to fix. He was talking directly to the camera with this smug expression I'd never seen on his face before. So, my dad works at a warehouse making $12 an hour and thinks we're doing fine. We literally can't afford new shoes. I'm wearing the same hoodie I got in 8th grade. But sure, Dad, keep telling me to be grateful. The video had 94,000 views. The comments were worse. People calling me a deadbeat, a failure, asking why I didn't get a real job or go back to school. Someone had found out where I worked and tagged the company. My manager was going to see this. My coworkers were going to see this. Everyone would know exactly how little I made and exactly how badly I was failing my kid. I stood there in the loading dock with a box of printer paper in my hands and tried to remember how to breathe. Marcus, the guy working the next bay over, asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and went back to loading trucks because that's what you do when you're 42 years old and your entire worth as a father has just been calculated and found wanting by the internet. The shift ended at 8. I drove home in my 2004 Civic with the broken air conditioning and the duct-taped bumper and tried to figure out what I was going to say. Dylan would still be asleep because teenagers didn't wake up before noon on Saturdays if they could help it. I'd have time to think, time to plan, time to decide whether I was going to yell or cry or just pretend I'd never seen the video. But when I walked into our apartment, Dylan was awake. He was sitting on the couch eating cereal and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I came in and I saw it immediately. Guilt. Just a flash of it before he covered it with defiance. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. I asked him what the hell he was thinking. He shrugged and said everyone complained about their parents online. It wasn't a big deal. I told him 94,000 people had seen him mock me for being poor. That felt like a pretty big deal. Dylan set down his cereal bowl and looked at me with this expression that was part teenage bravado and part genuine confusion. He said he didn't understand why I was so mad because everything he said was true. We were poor. I did make $12 an hour. We couldn't afford new stuff. He was just being honest about our situation. Our friends live in actual houses. Jeremy's dad is a lawyer. Katie's parents took her to Europe last summer. And we're here in this dump-eating store-brand cereal because you can't even afford Cheerios. I asked him if he had any idea what that cereal cost. He said he didn't care what it cost. He cared that his entire life was defined by what we couldn't afford. His school had a ski trip coming up that he couldn't go on. His phone was 3 generations old. His shoes had holes in them. He was tired of being the poor kid, and he was tired of pretending it was okay. I stood there listening to my son list all the ways I'd failed him, and felt something crack open in my chest. Not anger, something colder. I walked to my bedroom and came back with the stack of papers I kept in my nightstand drawer, the ones I didn't want him to see because I was trying to protect him from the reality of our situation. I dropped them on the coffee table in front of him. You want to know what poor actually looks like? Start reading. The first paper was our eviction notice. 3 months behind on rent. Total amount due, $4,370. Pay by the 15th of next month or vacate the premises. Dylan picked it up, and I watched his face change as he read it. The smugness drained away and left something younger. Something scared. He asked if this was real. I told him it was delivered on Thursday while he was at school. I'd been trying to figure out how to come up with the money before I had to tell him we might be homeless. The second paper was our utility shutoff notice. Electric company was cutting power in 11 days unless I paid the past due balance of $623. The third paper was the hospital bill, from when Dylan had that allergic reaction last year, and I'd taken him to the emergency room. $8,000. Collections agency had already called twice this week. I kept pulling papers from the stack. Car insurance overdue, credit card maxed out at the limit, medical bills for my own prescriptions that I'd stopped filling because I couldn't afford both my medication and his lunch money. The phone bill, the internet bill, the minimum payment on the debt consolidation loan I'd taken out 2 years ago that still had $11,000 left on it. Dylan was staring at the papers spread across the table between his cereal bowl and the TV remote. His hands were shaking. I sat down next to him and opened my laptop, pulled up my bank account and turned the screen toward him. Current balance, $47.32. Next paycheck, $960 after taxes, hitting in 5 days. I opened a spreadsheet I'd made 3 months ago when I realized we were drowning. It had every expense listed in brutal detail. Rent was $2,000 a month for this 2-bedroom apartment with water damage and a landlord who ignored every repair request. That was more than half my income right there. Car payment, $185 because I needed transportation to get to work. Insurance, another $90. Gas, roughly $200 a month because the warehouse was 40 minutes away and I couldn't afford to live closer. Groceries, $400 if we were careful, which meant store-brand everything and no restaurants ever. His school lunch account, $60 a month. Electric bill averaged $120. Internet was $70 because he needed it for homework. My phone and his phone, $100 total. Then there were the things you couldn't plan for. Car repairs, doctor visits, the water heater that broke last winter and cost me $800 I didn't have. Dylan was reading the spreadsheet now, and I watched him do the math in his head. Watched him realize the numbers didn't add up, that our basic survival cost more than I made, that we'd been running a deficit for months, and I'd been juggling which bill to pay and which to let slide. He asked how we were still here if I couldn't pay everything. I told him I'd been working double shifts whenever they were available, skipping meals to stretch the grocery money, using credit cards to cover the gaps and then making minimum payments that barely touched the principal, selling things we didn't need on Facebook Marketplace. I'd sold his grandmother's jewelry last month for $300 to make a partial rent payment. He didn't know because I told him I'd put it in storage. Dylan's face had gone white. He asked why I never told him any of this. I said because he was my kid and it was my job to handle it, not his. Because I wanted him to have a normal teenage life where he worried about homework and friends and TikTok, not about whether we'd have electricity next week. Because I thought if I could just work hard enough, figure it out, keep all the plates spinning, he'd never have to know how bad things really were. But it didn't work, Dylan said quietly. We're still poor. You're still working yourself to death. And I just made it worse. I didn't disagree. The video had made everything worse. I'd gotten 3 texts from my manager already asking to meet on Monday. The warehouse had a social media policy. Employees couldn't be associated with content that reflected badly on the company. I might lose my job because my kid decided our poverty was entertainment. Dylan reached for his phone, and I thought he was going to make another video or text his friends. Instead, he deleted the TikTok post. He deleted his whole account, just sat there and erased the thing he'd spent 2 years building because it had 12,000 followers and made him feel important at school. He said he was sorry, that he didn't think about what would happen, that he was just mad about not having the things his friends had, and he took it out on me in the stupidest way possible. I told him sorry wasn't going to pay our rent. He asked what we were going to do. I looked at the eviction notice with its red lettering and its court date and its list of fees that would be added if we didn't comply. I looked at my son, who was finally understanding that money wasn't just something parents magically had or didn't have. It was something you fought for every single day and sometimes lost anyway. I told him the truth. I didn't know. I'd already picked up every available overtime shift. I'd already asked my boss for a raise and been told the company didn't do mid-year adjustments. I'd already applied for public assistance and been denied because I made $40 a month over the income limit. I'd already looked into second jobs, but there wasn't time in the day. I was already working 55 hours a week and barely sleeping. There wasn't more to give. Dylan asked about family. I told him my parents were dead and his mother had moved to Oregon with her new husband and hadn't sent child support in 4 years. I'd stopped trying to enforce it through the courts because the lawyer cost more than I'd ever recover. His grandparents on her side had made it clear they thought he was better off with her, and I was a mistake she'd corrected. We didn't have family. We had each other, and we had 12 days before the electric company cut our power and 3 weeks before the sheriff showed up to remove us from this apartment. Dylan stood up and started pacing. He was tall for 16, taller than me now, and I could see him trying to think through solutions the way I'd been trying for months. He asked if I could borrow money. I showed him my credit report. 3 cards maxed out, personal loan in collections. Credit score so low no bank would touch me. He asked about the stuff in our apartment. What if we sold it? I told him I'd already sold anything worth selling. The TV was 6 years old and worth maybe $50. The furniture was from Goodwill. His gaming console I'd bought him 2 Christmases ago might get us $200, but he needed that for the one escape he had from all of this. I wasn't taking that from him too. He stopped pacing and looked at me. What if I got a job? I told him he was 16 and in school. He said plenty of kids worked. He could get something after school and on weekends. Fast food places were always hiring. He could make $10 an hour easy, maybe more. That would be at least $1,000 a month to help with bills. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to say this was my responsibility, and he should focus on school and being a kid while he still could. But we were looking at homelessness in 3 weeks, and pride didn't keep the lights on. I asked if he was serious. He said he'd never been more serious about anything. That video got 94,000 views because people loved watching other people's misery. He'd made our life into entertainment, and now he was going to fix it. He opened his laptop and started searching for job applications. I watched him fill out forms for McDonald's, Burger King, a grocery store, a movie theater. He listed his school schedule and marked himself available every evening and all weekend. References? None. Work experience? None. But he was willing to learn, and he'd show up on time, and he'd do whatever they asked because his family needed him. He submitted 7 applications in 30 minutes. Then he looked at me and asked what else we could do. I pulled up the eviction notice again and called the number for our landlord's office. Got voicemail because it was Saturday. I left a message explaining our situation and asking if we could set up a payment plan. pay what we could now, and spread the rest over the next few months. I'd done this before, and they'd said no, but I had to try. Dylan was still on his laptop. He'd moved on from job applications to the spreadsheet, studying it with the kind of focus I usually only saw when he was gaming. He asked why the car payment was so high for such an old car. I explained I'd bought it 3 years ago when my previous car died. Used, $15,000, financed at 18% interest because my credit was already bad. I still owed $7,000 on a car worth maybe $3,000. He asked why I didn't just take the bus. I told him there was no bus route to the warehouse. I'd looked. Uber would cost more than the car payment. Dylan was quiet for a minute, then asked about the medical bills, the $8,000 from his hospital visit. I said insurance covered some, but our deductible was $6,000 and I hadn't hit it yet that year. He asked why we even had insurance if it didn't cover anything. I showed him the premium, $240 a month through my employer. But without it, that hospital bill would have been $40,000. We were paying for protection against complete disaster while slowly drowning in partial disaster. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the traffic noise from the street outside. Dylan closed the laptop and put his head in his hands. He said this was impossible, that the numbers didn't work, that even if he got a job and even if I kept working overtime and even if we cut every possible expense, we'd still be behind. I told him that's what being poor actually meant. It meant fighting as hard as you could and still losing ground. It meant choosing which bill to pay and which to ignore. It meant living in constant fear of the next emergency because there was no cushion, no savings, no margin for error. One flat tire could spiral into missing work, could spiral into losing the job, could spiral into losing everything. He asked how long we'd been living on the edge. I told him since his mother left. 4 years of barely holding on, of patching together solutions, of hoping the next paycheck would be the one that finally got us ahead. It never was. His phone started buzzing with notifications. His friends were texting, asking why he'd deleted his account. Jeremy wanted to know if his parents made him take it down. Katie asked if he was okay. Dylan ignored them all. He asked if I was going to lose my job because of the video. I told him I didn't know, that my manager had asked to meet Monday morning, and warehouse managers didn't request meetings over text unless it was serious. The company had a zero-tolerance policy for anything that made them look bad. An employee's kid making viral content about poverty wages could definitely qualify. Dylan said it wasn't fair, that he made the video, not me, that I shouldn't be punished for his mistake. I said, life wasn't fair, and the sooner he learned that, the better off he'd be. His face hardened, and he said if I lost my job, he'd quit school and work full-time. We'd figure it out together. I told him absolutely not. Education was the only way out of this cycle. I dropped out of college when his mother got pregnant and spent the last 16 years regretting it. He was going to finish high school and he was going to go to college somehow and he was going to have opportunities I never had. He said that was great in theory, but in practice we were about to be homeless. Theory didn't matter when you were sleeping in your car. I didn't have an answer for that because he was right. Monday morning came, and I put on my least wrinkled work shirt and drove to the warehouse with my stomach in knots. Dylan had stayed home from school, said he couldn't face people yet. I told him to use the time to study for his chemistry test, but I knew he'd spend it staring at the eviction notice and the budget spreadsheet. My manager's name was Todd, and he was 35 and had never worried about money a day in his life. He met me in the break room before shift start and closed the door. He had his tablet pulled up with Dylan's video already loaded, asked if I'd seen it. I said yes. He said the company took social media very seriously, that we had policies about maintaining a professional image, that employees were expected to represent the brand positively, even outside work hours. I asked if he was firing me for my kid's TikTok. Todd shifted in his seat and said it was more complicated than that. The video had been shared to the company's Facebook page by someone. HR was aware. Corporate was aware. They needed to respond appropriately. I'd worked there for 8 years. I'd never missed a shift. I'd taken every overtime hour they offered. I'd trained new hires and covered for sick coworkers and done everything they'd ever asked. And they were going to fire me because my 16-year-old was an idiot on the internet. Todd said he wasn't firing me. He was putting me on probation. 2 weeks. Any further incidents, and I was done. Also, no overtime shifts until the probation period ended. I felt the floor tilt. No overtime meant no extra money. No extra money meant no chance of catching up on rent. I asked if he was serious. He said the decision came from corporate. His hands were tied. I should be grateful I still had a job at all. I went out to the loading dock and worked my regular 8-hour shift while doing the math in my head. 40 hours a week at $12 an hour was $480 before taxes. Call it $380 after. Times 2 paychecks a month was $760. Our rent alone was $2,000. We were done. There was no version of this where we stayed housed. At lunch, I checked my phone and had a voicemail from the landlord's office. They'd reviewed my request for a payment plan and denied it. Full amount due by the 15th, or they'd proceed with eviction. I also had a text from Dylan. He'd gotten a call back from the grocery store. They wanted him to come in for an interview. I called him during my 15-minute break and he answered on the first ring. He was excited, practically vibrating through the phone. The manager had said they needed someone for evening stocking shifts. 6 to 10 Monday through Thursday, $9 an hour to start. He could make almost $200 a week. I told him that was great. I tried to sound encouraging. Inside, I was calculating that $200 a week wasn't going to save us, but it might buy us a few more weeks in a motel after we got evicted. Dylan went to the interview that evening. I picked him up after my shift and drove him to the grocery store 3 miles from our apartment. He was wearing khakis I'd bought him for his cousin's funeral last year and a button-down shirt I'd found at Goodwill. He looked nervous and young and like he was trying so hard to be grown up. I waited in the parking lot and watched him walk inside. He was in there for 23 minutes. When he came out, he was grinning. He got in the car and said he got the job. Starts Thursday. Training shifts would be 6 to 9 this week, then regular schedule next week. They'd pay him every 2 weeks. First paycheck would be small, but after that he'd be bringing in real money. I told him I was proud of him. He asked if this meant we could save the apartment. I told him the truth. We could try. That night, Dylan and I sat at the kitchen table with the calculator and the spreadsheet and tried to make the numbers work. My reduced income plus his new job, plus the $47 in our bank account, plus anything we could scrape together in the next 12 days. We needed $4,300 for the rent, $600 for electric, and another $500 for food and gas to make it through the month. $4,400 total. We had maybe $1,700 coming in before the 15th. Dylan asked about selling the car. I said we'd still owe more than it was worth, and then I'd have no way to get to work. He asked about pawning things. I showed him our apartment with its secondhand furniture and its empty walls. We had nothing valuable left. He asked if there were charities that helped with rent. I'd already called everyone I could find. Most had waiting lists months long, the ones that didn't require proof of income above a certain threshold because they wanted to help people who were temporarily struggling, not people who were permanently poor. We didn't qualify. Dylan was getting frustrated. He said there had to be something, some option we weren't seeing. I told him I'd been searching for that option for 4 years, and if it existed, I would have found it. The system wasn't built to help people like us. It was built to extract everything we had and then punish us for not having more. He asked what happened when we got evicted. I said we had 30 days after the court judgment to vacate. During that time, I'd try to find somewhere else that would rent to us, which would be nearly impossible with an eviction on record. Most likely, we'd end up in my car until I could save enough for a deposit somewhere. Dylan would stay with a friend if any of them would take him. Split up until I got stable again. He said absolutely not. He wasn't leaving me. If I was sleeping in the car, then he was sleeping in the car. I told him that wasn't how this worked. He had school and friends and a future. I'd figure something out for myself. He slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the papers jump. He said I needed to stop treating him like a child who couldn't handle reality. He'd seen the reality now. The video made sure of that. We were in this together, and we were going to face whatever came together. His phone buzzed, and he looked at it, then showed me the screen. It was a news article someone had sent him. Teens' viral poverty video sparks debate about warehouse wages. They'd written a story about Dylan's TikTok, interviewed economists and labor activists about whether $12 an hour was sufficient for supporting a family, used my employer's name specifically, talked about record profits while workers struggled. The article had been published that morning and had 6,000 shares already. Dylan was reading through it with this expression I couldn't quite identify. Then he opened his email and started typing. I asked what he was doing. He said he was contacting the journalist who wrote the article, offering to do an interview about what happened after the video, about the eviction notice and the budget spreadsheet and everything he'd learned. I told him that was a terrible idea, that making this more public would only make things worse. He said it couldn't get worse. I was already on probation at work. We were already getting evicted. What did we have to lose? Maybe if people understood the reality, really understood it, something would change. Maybe the company would feel pressured to do something. Maybe there'd be donations or help, or at least awareness that this wasn't just our problem. It was systematic. I wanted to tell him he was naive. That viral attention never helped the people in the story. It just extracted their pain for content and moved on. But I was too tired to argue, and maybe he was right that we had nothing left to lose. He sent the email. The journalist responded in 17 minutes. She wanted to interview both of us. Tonight, if possible. She'd come to our apartment and we could explain everything on camera. Dylan looked at me. I looked at the eviction notice still sitting on the table, at the spreadsheet with its brutal numbers, at my son who'd made a stupid mistake and was now trying desperately to fix it in the only way he knew how. I said okay. The journalist's name was Rebecca, and she arrived at 7:30 with a cameraman and a lighting kit that barely fit in our small living room. She was maybe 40, professional, sympathetic in a way that felt genuine but also calculated. She asked us to sit on the couch and tell our story from the beginning. Dylan explained the video, why he made it, what he was feeling, how he didn't understand the consequences. I explained the financial reality, the spreadsheet, the eviction notice, the impossibility of surviving on $12 an hour. Rebecca asked good questions. How long had we struggled? What assistance had we applied for? What would happen if I lost my job? The cameraman recorded everything. At one point, Rebecca asked Dylan what he wanted people to understand. He looked directly at the camera and said that poverty wasn't a character flaw, that his dad worked harder than anyone he knew, and it still wasn't enough, that the system was broken and people needed to stop blaming individuals for structural failures. I was proud of him in that moment. Proud and terrified because putting this out in the world meant we couldn't take it back. The interview lasted 90 minutes. Rebecca said it would be part of a longer piece about wage stagnation and housing insecurity. She'd let us know when it published. They packed up their equipment and left, and Dylan and I sat in the sudden silence of our apartment. He asked if I thought it would help. I said I honestly didn't know. Thursday, Dylan started his job at the grocery store. I dropped him off at 5:50 and watched him walk through the automatic doors in his new work polo they'd given him during training. He looked so young, too young to be working evening shifts because his father couldn't keep them housed. I drove to my own shift and spent 8 hours loading trucks and thinking about how completely I'd failed at the one job that mattered. When I picked Dylan up at 9, he was exhausted but proud. He'd stocked shelves and helped customers and learned how to use the pricing gun. His manager said he did good work. He'd earned $72. We went home and he added that number to the spreadsheet. It didn't change anything meaningful, but he seemed to need the ritual of recording it, of seeing his contribution acknowledged. The weekend passed. Dylan worked Saturday and Sunday at the grocery store. I picked up a one-time moving job through Craigslist that paid me $200 cash under the table. We added everything to the spreadsheet. By Sunday night, we had $1,100 saved. Still $3,000 short of what we needed. The 15th was Tuesday. Tomorrow I'd get paid. $960. That would bring us to $2,060, not even half. Dylan asked if we should just leave before the eviction happened. I said that would make finding a new place even harder. We'd wait for the court process and use the time to find somewhere to go. He asked if I'd started looking. I hadn't because everywhere required first month, last month, and security deposit. We didn't have that kind of money. Monday morning, the article published. Rebecca had titled it, The $12 Hour Trap, One Family's Story of Working Poverty. The video interview was embedded in the middle along with our photos and quotes. She'd framed it well, putting our situation in context with statistics about housing costs and wage growth and the widening gap between productivity and pay. The article went viral immediately. By noon, it had 50,000 shares. By evening, it was trending on social media. My phone exploded with notifications. People I hadn't talked to in years were reaching out. Former classmates, distant relatives, strangers who'd seen the article. Most were supportive. Some were critical. Plenty said I should have made better choices, should have finished college, should have picked a better paying field. Should have, as if I hadn't thought of all that 1,000 times. Dylan's phone was worse. His friends from school had seen it. Their parents had seen it. Everyone knew now exactly how poor we were and exactly how desperate. He came home from school Tuesday looking defeated. Said people were treating him differently. Some pitied him. Some avoided him. Jeremy's mom had told him maybe he shouldn't hang out with Dylan anymore because she didn't want her son exposed to that kind of instability. Dylan said it felt like being marked. I told him that was what poverty did. It marked you, made you visible in all the wrong ways while making you invisible in the ones that mattered. Nobody saw how hard we worked. They only saw that we failed. Tuesday was the 15th, the day our rent was due. I'd gotten paid that morning, and our account balance was $2,073. I called the landlord's office and asked one more time about a payment plan. The woman on the phone said their policy was clear. Full payment or eviction proceedings begin. I asked when the sheriff would come. She said they'd file with the court tomorrow. Judgment usually took a week. After that, we'd have 30 days to vacate. So about 5 weeks total before we were physically removed. I thanked her and hung up. Dylan was sitting on the couch listening. He asked if this was really happening. I said it was really happening. He got quiet and then said he had something to show me. He pulled up his phone and opened a GoFundMe page I didn't know existed. Someone had created it after seeing the article. Help Dylan and his dad keep their home. The description explained our situation and asked for donations to cover the rent shortfall. It had been active for 18 hours. Dylan scrolled down to show me the total raised. $41,000. I stared at the number. Read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding correctly. $41,000 from strangers on the internet who'd read our story and decided to help. The comments were full of people sharing their own struggles, thanking us for being honest, hoping this helped. Dylan was crying. Not from sadness, but from something else. Relief, maybe, or disbelief, or the overwhelming weight of being seen. I was crying too. For the first time in 4 years, I was crying because something good had happened. Because people cared. Because we weren't alone in this. I called the landlord's office back, said I could pay the full amount due plus next month's rent in advance. The woman sounded surprised, but said that would work. I paid it through their online portal right there on the phone while she confirmed the transaction. $4,300 for the back rent, $2,000 for next month. Our account balance dropped to $34,700. Dylan and I sat on the couch staring at that number. It was more money than I'd seen it once in my entire life. More than enough to catch up on everything. The electric bill, the medical bills, the credit cards. Enough to fix the car, buy Dylan new shoes, maybe even start an actual emergency fund. I asked him who started the GoFundMe. He said he didn't know. The account was anonymous. Whoever it was had done what we couldn't. They'd made our need visible in a way that motivated action. Over the next week, the donations kept coming. The total reached $62,000 before people stopped sharing it. Strangers from around the country sending $20 or $50 or sometimes $500, each one with a message. I've been there. Stay strong. You deserve better. The money changed everything. I paid off every past due bill, settled the hospital debt for 40 cents on the dollar, put $10,000 in savings, started making real payments on the car loan instead of minimums. When the account finally stabilized, we had $28,000 left over. $28,000 that represented breathing room I'd never experienced. Dylan and I sat down with the spreadsheet and redid it completely. Without the crushing debt payments, we were actually making enough to survive on. Barely, but we were surviving. He could keep his job if he wanted or quit and focus on school. I could stop working overtime and still make rent. We could buy groceries without counting every dollar. The relief was so intense, it felt physical. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only escaped because we went viral. Because our suffering became content that people consumed and felt moved by. What about everyone else struggling just like we were, who didn't have a video, didn't have an article, didn't have strangers deciding they were worthy of help? Todd called me into his office Thursday, said corporate had seen the article. They were concerned about the publicity. The company was facing questions about wage practices and employee welfare. They wanted to offer me a raise, $15 an hour, retroactive to last month. I asked if this had anything to do with the story going viral. Todd said the company regularly reviewed compensation. This was just timing. I didn't believe him, and he knew I didn't believe him, but it didn't matter. $3 an hour was an extra $500 a month. It was real money. I took it. Dylan quit his job at the grocery store after 2 weeks. He'd made $400 total and said it was the hardest money he'd ever earned. He understood now why I came home exhausted, why I didn't have energy for much besides work and sleep. He focused on school, and his grades started improving. He joined the robotics club he'd always wanted to join, but we couldn't afford the fees for. He made new friends who didn't care about his viral video or his family's financial struggles. He was just Dylan again, not the poor kid from TikTok. The attention from the article faded after a few weeks. People moved on to the next story, the next tragedy, the next viral moment. We were left with the aftermath. The money, yes, but also the knowledge of how close we'd come to losing everything. I started looking into community college classes. Maybe I could finish that degree I'd abandoned 16 years ago. Start building towards something better. Dylan was planning for college too, now that it seemed possible. His grades were good enough for scholarships if he kept them up. We talked about state schools and financial aid and what his future might hold. 6 months after the video, after the article, after the GoFundMe that saved us, Dylan and I were sitting in a real restaurant for the first time in years. Nothing fancy, just a chain place with waiters and menus. He ordered a burger without checking the price first. That small freedom felt enormous. He said he still felt guilty about the video, about putting our business out there like that. I told him I wasn't sure anymore whether to be angry about it or grateful for it. He'd humiliated me, yes, but the humiliation led to help we desperately needed and never would have asked for. Sometimes shame was the price of survival. Dylan said he'd learned more from those few months than from all of school, that poverty wasn't abstract anymore. It had a specific weight, a specific texture, a specific daily grind that never stopped. He said he wanted to do something with that knowledge eventually, maybe work in policy or nonprofit or something that helped people stuck in the same trap we'd been in. I told him that would make everything worth it. The article, the exposure, the strangers knowing our business. If it taught him something real and he used that to help others, then maybe the cost was acceptable. We finished dinner, and I paid with my debit card without checking the account balance first. That small freedom felt enormous, too. The relief of knowing there was enough, of knowing we weren't one emergency away from disaster, of knowing next month's rent would get paid on time, and the lights would stay on, and there would be food in the refrigerator. We drove home, and Dylan went to his room to do homework. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and looked at the spreadsheet one more time, updated it with current numbers. Income in green, expenses in red, surplus for the first time ever in blue, $63 left over at the end of the month. Not much, but more than nothing, more than negative. We'd survived, not because I worked harder or figured something out or pulled myself up by non-existent bootstraps. We'd survived because my son made a mistake that went viral and strangers decided we deserved help. The system hadn't changed. We'd just gotten lucky. Everyone else still trapped in $12 an hour jobs with impossible rent and mounting debt was still trapped, but we weren't, and that had to mean something. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.